Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. As you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and you know that because I tell you every week, but every week is somebody new's first-time episode, and I want them to know that they can get Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees as an audiobook, a paperback, and the ebook is free to download whenever you're watching or listening to this. Don't worry about me. I'll get mine when you get hooked on the series and you come back with money for books 2 and 3. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I've written some novels for older readers, such as the Book of David. You can get the Book of David Chapter 1 for free as well. For more information on all of that, plus interviews with thousands of literary agents, authors, publishing professionals, all the world's best people, head to middlegradeninja.com. It will make every dream you've ever had come true. My goodness, that is enough intro. There's 2 of you tonight. We've got no time to spare. We've got to go with it. And I'm going to choose the order of the books in the series that have come out. I feel that's the only fair way to do that. So Michelle, I'm going to ask you first to give us kind of an overview of your background, because I never summarized anybody else's background or anyone else's book. So if you would go first, and then Samantha, we want to hear about your background as well.
Oh, well, thank you for having us here, Rob. My name is Michelle Jabès Corpora. I am here because I'm the author of the first book in the American Horsetail series called The Dust Bowl. My background is in publishing. I worked for Harper Collins, Green Willow for about 5 years in New York, and then after that, and since then, I've been working for a book packager called Working Partners, making all kinds of stories for young readers. But I am also a ghostwriter, so I've written 5 novels in a long-running middle grade series that I cannot tell you about, or else I'll have to kill you, so sorry. But most recently, other than The Dust Bowl, this year I also wrote a book called The Fog of War, which is the 8th novel in the True Adventures series from Pushkin. And The Fog of War is about the amazing Martha Gellhorn, who was a war correspondent in World War II. So that's me.
The books that you've ghostwritten, of course, are the Banneker Bones books. Now the truth can finally be revealed. And Samantha, over to you. What does the esteemed audience need to know about you before we get going here?
I'm like Michelle. Thank you so much for having us. I'm so excited to be doing this. And so my name is Samantha M. Clark, and I'm the author of 3 books now, which is pretty amazing and surreal because I honestly never thought that one of my books would get published, but now I have 3 out. The Boy, the Boat, and the Beast, which was my debut that came out in 2018 with Simon & Schuster. And then this year I had 2 books that came out, Arrow, which was also out by Simon & Schuster, about a boy, an 11-year-old boy who, with a limb difference, who is the only human who's been living in a magically hidden rainforest. And then the outside arid dry world kind of infiltrates it, and Arrow has to save his home. And then finally, which came out a week later, the 2nd book in the American Horsetail series, Hollywood, which I'm so excited about. It's the first book that I've written that is part of a series, and just it's been a very different experience, so much fun, and it's been so great sharing this with Michelle as well. Just fantastic. I'm really excited about it.
You have 2 books come out a week apart. Is that a curse or a blessing because you get all the promotion all at once, or is it just too much and it would be better to give them some space?
It was surreal. It wasn't really planned that way. Originally, the American Horsetails book was supposed to come out before. The Arrow has The Boy, the Boat, and the Beast came out June 22nd, and Simon & Schuster set up Arrow to come out at pretty much the same date, although in a different year. So 3 years later, it was set for June. For June 26th. So then we heard that the American Horsetails books had been delayed and were coming out had been moved from, I think they were originally in May, and they'd been moved to June. And then I found out that the date was going to be you know, literally a week after the Arrow was coming out, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know, you know, how this is going to work, but it's going to be busy and it's going to be fun. And it was a lot of fun. I kind of felt bad for my family because I was constantly like, here's all of this book news. And then I have a chapter book series that's coming out, that's launching next year. So right after these two books came out, then that was announced. And so I actually posted it on Facebook and said, okay, I promise you guys, this is the last time you'll hear about book stuff from me for just a little while, but here's some more good news. So it felt like there was all this good news kind of all happening at the same time, but it's all good news and fun, and it's been amazing. Like, I did one event where I was able to sign both Arrow and Hollywood, and it's been, you know, a lot of fun.
Well, I'm sure in a long and successful writing career, there's never going to be a couple of week stretches where it's just bad news.
Yeah, hopefully, that's true. Hopefully. And when you've got when you've got books coming out from different publishing houses, you don't have control over when they're going to come out. But my hope is that, you know, when I'm promoting Arrow, that the readers who are discovering Arrow, if they like Arrow, they will go to you know, my website, and then they'll learn about the American Horse Tales book through that, and find both Michelle's and my American Horse Tales book at the same time. So my hope is that the two books can, you know, kind of find new readers, you know, each by themselves, and bring new readers to each other. I do believe that happens. Hope I'm right.
We could be making that happen for a esteemed audience right now. Where should they go to visit your website?
It's samantham.clark.com, with the M, because there's a lot of Samantha Clarks, so I had to put in the M so that I stood out a little bit more. So samantham.clark.com.
And Michelle, where can folks visit to find out more about you?
Very similar, michellejcorpora.com.
And then, of course, you've got the two books coming out this year. Are either of you in a position where you can announce your future projects? Samantha, are you able to tell us the title of the chapter book series that's coming?
Yes, it's called Gemstone Dragons. It's coming out with Bloomsbury. The first two books are coming out. I'm not sure the date yet or the month. I know that it's winter next year, and they're being illustrated by Janelle Anderson, who is absolutely brilliant. I've seen early sketches, and she's amazing. And the first two books, the Gemstone Dragons series, is about these adorable dragons who have a gemstone and a superpower that kind of goes with their gemstone. And they live in Gemstone Valley with other magical creatures like unicorns and gnomes and goblins and fairies. And the dragons, you know, protect all of the magical creatures in Gemstone Valley. They live in Sparkle Cave in the middle of Mineral Mountain, and they have lots of adventures, always, you know, where their friends, you know, their friendship usually saves them in the end. And the first two books, Opal is, which funnily enough is my birthstone, Opal is going to be she's the lead of the book one, which is Opal's, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name. Book two is Ruby's Fiery Mishap. Oh, Opal's Time to Shine is book one, and then Ruby's Fiery Mishap is book two. So I'm very excited about them. They're fun. They've been fun to work on.
Congratulations, that is tremendous.
Thank you.
And so that begs the question. We're going to talk quite a bit about Hollywood, because I'm curious how it would be to write a book with no dragons, no fantasy elements of any kind. That puts you a little bit out of your element. But if you're writing a book about superpowers, I make it my business to ask, if you could only have one superpower, what superpower would you want?
I've always kind of said that I'd love to have invisibility, but after writing Opal's book, I'm not really sure if I'd want that anymore. Like, I used to, you know, as a kid, friends and I, we used to ask each other that same question all the time, and invisibility was hands down always my first choice. But one of the things in Opal's story is that she gets to be seen and learns to be seen, and I'm not sure if if I want to be invisible anymore. I don't know. I was very shy as a kid, which is why I think I always wanted to be invisible, you know. But I don't know. I'm not really sure. Michelle, do you have a superpower that you would like to be?
I always feel like the one that I choose is lame, but it is what I would choose. I would probably choose healing power.
Oh, I like healing power. That's a good one. I think that says a lot about you, though, Michelle.
I always think in my mind that like the conclusion of having a healing power though is like bad, because everybody in the world is like, you know, coming to you, and I'm not sure if that's the way things should work, but I would still want to be able to do that.
I like that healing power. Yeah, people will be coming to you with the wart on their big toe. You know, can you take off my wart? You'd have to set some good boundaries there. No wart taking off.
Well, it's the whole like playing God thing, you know. There's like a whole story there of like.
Yeah. That's
although
true.
I guess all superpowers is a bit like playing God. So.
Yeah, that's true. And Robert, what would yours be?
Well, I think both yours sound pretty good. I was just thinking about what a writerly superpower it would be to want to be invisible, because then you could really eavesdrop on conversation,
right.
All sorts of character details gathered up. I've always thought
in me, I guess.
it as well would be my choice, but it would be just for me. None of this, none of this sharing with others. Just I'll be immortal. Anytime something bad happens to me, Wolverine style, I'll come right back. It's no problem. I don't have to worry anymore.
Way to go with it, yeah.
Can you heal my wart? I so wish I could, but no.
I can heal my own
warts.
I can only heal myself. Sorry.
Michelle, I want to go back, and we're going to talk all about American Horse Tales, I promise. But I wanted to talk a little bit about getting started in publishing, because you said you were 5 years with Harper Collins before you began working with your book publisher now. So how do you get started in publishing? How do you break in?
Well, basically, you give up your entire life and move to New York. Yeah, it was kind of a dream of mine to work in children's books, but for most of my youth, I thought it was basically an impossible thing. Like, there's no, like, who actually does this? Certainly not me. So I had after college, I had a very normal set of jobs, marketing and such things, and I did go to get a master's degree in children's literature, thinking maybe I can do this. So basically, I quit my very stable job at like 26 years old and took my husband away from his very stable job here in Maryland, and we moved to Brooklyn. And I took 2 non-paid internships at Bloomsbury and Penguin and hoped for the best. So luckily it turned out well, and I got the job at Harper Collins within like 2 months after that, and worked my way up from the bottom. I mean, I only ever in the 5 years was, you know, an assistant editor. At that point, I had my first child, and I realized I wanted to sort of do different things. And then the opportunity to work at this new company, this book packaging company, came up, and it was wonderful, because they were like, hey, do you want to keep making children's books and do it from home? Because they are headquartered in England, and they wanted to have some American editors. So that's how that all started, and I've been doing that for part-time for 10 years. So it was a really amazing experience, because I got to work at a publisher and really see books from that perspective, which is very different than I think you see things as a writer. And then at the book packager that I work at now, you know, it's kind of like being a giant Borg writer with lots of other people, because, you know, we're not publishers. We do sell to publishers as well, but we work as a team. We work as a group, like a hive mind, and you know, come up with all kinds of different ideas. And so that really has taught me how to make writing more of a, when I say a job, I feel like it makes it sound like it's boring, but it made me be very disciplined and organized about writing stories in a way that I never was before. And it also broadened my horizons of all the different kinds of stories that I could write, because I wasn't really sure for a long time what my voice was or what my genre was. And, you know, trying out so many different things all the time for work is a really good way of seeing what you like. And so it's been a really interesting adventure. I'll say that.
Had you always wanted to be an author, or was it, I want to be an editor and then I can work on all the books, and then while you were doing it, we're like, I keep reading these books that other people wrote. Now get out of here. Let me write one.
No, I always wanted to be an author, but I think, you know, I wanted to be, I turned my attention to pursuing editing because I thought I need a stable job that I can do all the time that I like. And at the time I had been working in marketing, like I said, or, you know, working at continuing education. And I was just like, I don't want to do this. And so I thought, you know, hey, I'll go and I'll be an editor. And that, I think for a long time through being an editor, I just kind of didn't believe that I could cut it as a writer. I just didn't think I had I always wanted to since I was a child, but at that point as an adult, I think I didn't have the confidence to think that I could do it. And it wasn't until a lot of these other experiences that I got to the point where I was like, I don't know why I thought that. Like, I can definitely do this. I've been doing it. So it was really all in my own head, you know. And I mean, honestly, the connections that I made everywhere that I worked and everywhere, that's what made everything possible. So I'm a firm believer in, you know, taking risks and following patterns. So like everything that I did was always something that at the time I thought was completely nuts. And then it always inevitably led to something else that was great. And because I just jumped right in, you know, so yeah, it's an interesting journey for sure.
So interesting that you had the confidence, I assume because you just won the lottery, but you had the confidence to quit your job, convince your husband to quit your job, which lets me know that if you decide to be in sales, watch out. You're obviously very convincing. And you moved to New York without a job that you have, just to get in the market with the confidence that somehow you're going to make that happen, and yet still lacking the confidence that you could be an author.
Yeah, it's weird. I tell it to my therapist all the time. What's going on? No, I think you know, I really put the idea of being an author on an enormous pedestal. And I mean, I think I still do. I mean, I'm like amazed right now, you know, that this is even happening. I really just had such immense respect for just it as a career and people who do it. And so it took me a long time to be able to get there, you know. And I think everything that happened along the way was, you know, the education that I needed to be able to do what I've been doing.
Had you always wanted to be an author, or did you figure that out somewhere along the way?
I was the same way. I was nodding so much when Michelle was just saying all of that, because I was exactly the same way. And I was the same way in that I wanted to write books, but I mean, and I talk about this when I do school visits with kids, like, you know, I would see the names on books and I'd be like, you know, oh, this must be, you know, some robot person or someone who lives in a cloud or lives in some kind of special place or has some kind of special power, because it couldn't have been me. I couldn't be the same kind of person where I could have my name on a book. I didn't meet the first time. I think it's fantastic that they've got all of these author visits now for kids. I grew up all over the world. I was born in South America. I grew up in England, and we moved to Jamaica when I was 10, and Cayman Islands when I was 12. So I was kind of all over the place, and especially, you know, when I was the age that I really was kind of figuring out that, you know, this is really what I wanted to do and dreaming about my future, I was in a small Caribbean island and definitely didn't meet any, you know, authors or have any idea that this could ever be on, you know, on something that I could do on my horizon. But when I went to college, and the same thing, Michelle, when you were talking about doing something practical, you know, I wanted to, and at that point, actually, I kind of wanted to act. I basically wanted to do anything with story, you know. I wanted to write and I wanted to act. I just wanted to do things with stories. Stories were where it was at for me. And so when I went to college, my parents, to their absolute wisdom, suggested that I do a degree in journalism instead of, you know, theater. And I ended up doing a double degree, 2 degrees, one in 2 bachelors, one in mass communications, journalism, and one in theater, only because I had so many electives.
No way. I had a double major in theater and English.
Really?
Wow.
Same thing. So, see, it's like we're twins. We're just twins.
I know. This is all kismet.
That's right. So I did that degree, and that was my job. Like, I was working actually in a newspaper before I started college in Cayman, in the Caymanian Compass. They helped to sponsor me in college, which was amazing, a great opportunity. And so then after that, I stayed in journalism. But when I went to college, and funnily enough, not in my theater degree, but in my journalism degree, one of my journalism professors, Rick Wilbur, who is actually in my acknowledgements for The Boy, the Boat, and the Beast, because he encouraged me a lot. And I just got his latest book. He was the first author I had ever met. And he still writes sci-fi books, and he had written some sci-fi books, and I told him that I wanted to be an author one day, and he goes, "Oh, I'm an author." And he actually shared a literary agent with Orson Scott Card, and we had to interview someone, and I said that I would like to interview Orson Scott Card because I'm a huge Ender's Game fan, and he got me this interview with Orson Scott Card when I was in college, and that started to make me think that if my college professor could be an author, then maybe, possibly I could. But even then, I was thinking that I had to be an author in adult books, even though I wanted to write, you know, kids' books. And then I ended up, you know, had this career in journalism, and I ended up kind of, just because of the way the jobs were available, I ended up shuffling more into editing. My husband and I went to LA. He does visual effects. So when we were living in LA, for him doing visual effects, and I was working with a sister publication to Variety, which was for home entertainment, called Video Business. So I was working there. But in my spare time, I figured, when in Rome, I'm in LA, I should be focusing on writing screenplays. So the whole time that we lived in LA, I wrote screenplays. I think I ended up writing about 6 of them. By the time I'd written the 6th one, the protagonists were getting, you know, younger and younger, and I was realizing more that I wanted to write children's stories. And the final one I read, there was a book called Story by Robert McKee. That's really good. You got it? There it is.
Up there on the shelf.
Good. It's so good, isn't it, Rob? I love that book. It's so good. So in that book, he talks about writing a treatment, and there's an exercise that you can do. And I'm all up for, you know, I'll try anything. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, you know, I'll give it a try. So he talked about writing a treatment for a screenplay and writing no dialogue, just the entire story out. So this is like, I think, the 6th screenplay that I was working on. I wrote this big treatment for this story, and it was middle grade. I didn't really know what middle grade was at that time, but the story was middle grade. And I wrote all of this out. It was like 30 pages, this entire story. And when I got time to actually turn it into a screenplay, like that Robert McKee had talked about, I realized that I had more fun writing that treatment than I had writing the screenplays. And I was finally getting to the point where I was figuring out how to write screenplays, because it's a very different kind of, technique. And but I realized that I really just wanted to write novels, because writing the treatment, that's pretty much what I was doing. I mean, it's a very short novel, 30 pages, but that's what I was doing. So that ended up becoming the first novel that I wrote. And it almost got an agent. It was quite close, but I had a lot of learning to do. By the time I actually signed with my agent with the book that became The Boy, the Boat, and the Beast, I had then, The Boy, the Boat, and the Beast was the third novel I wrote. But by the time I signed with my agent, I had written 6 novels. And I would write a novel, revise it, get it as far as I could. Then I would write another novel, learn from that, go back to The Boy, the Boat, and the Beast, revise it more, and just kept doing that. And then finally, I finally was in a good enough place where I signed with my agent, and then it sold to Simon & Schuster. But yeah, so but I was the same way, as Michelle. I never really thought that I would actually get there. I used to go around calling The Boy, the Boat, and the Beast my weird little book. And when it finally sold, the art director at Simon Schuster, Laurent Lynn, who I'd known previously through the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, he's like, Sam, you got to stop calling it that. But it kind of was my weird little book. And, yeah. Now 3 books out, so it's still really surreal to me, but pretty amazing. It's an amazing industry. And I mentor writers now, and I always tell them, if I can do this, you can do this. It's not easy. It's hard work. It's a lot of work to get that, to really understand how stories work. That was, I think, one of the biggest learning curves. But everything that I did, all the journalism, and Michelle, it's probably the same for you, like that journalism part and learning screenplays, all of that helped me to become the novelist that I am today, You
have said the magic word for me. If I were to swear allegiance to a religious text, which to date I've decided not to, but if I were, it would be Story by Robert McKee. I teach it in every fiction workshop. I hit my 4 students over the head with a lot of his sayings, like just internalize this and you'll figure out the rest. Just first McKee, then everything else is going to be fine. I tell them it's like going to the rainforest and taking ayahuasca, but you can do it in your home with your Kindle or on an audiobook, and it will open up an entire world for you to see once you get there.
Yeah.
And then Michelle, so you're editing. Is it first you ghostwrite and then you start writing your own projects, or when do you make that leap from I'll be able to edit, I'll be able to be in publishing, but I could never possibly write anything, to now you've got 2 books coming out this year and many more to follow?
Well, it was like I said, through these connections that I made. Someone that I work with had a connection with this series herself, of the series that I cannot name, very long running middle grade famous mystery series. And so I just I knew about this, and one day I was just like, hey, can you put me in touch with the editor of the series? Because I knew that sometimes they had multiple writers on the series. And she said, sure. And that was it. I auditioned for the series, and once you're in, you're in. So the crazy thing is, before that, I had tried to write other books for myself. I had tried to write a YA novel. I tried to write a middle grade novel. I did have an agent by then, but nothing made it. Nothing sold. And I really, that it was discouraging, and I just felt like maybe I should just stick to what I'm doing. I'm editing. And then, when I found out about this connection she had, I just thought, well, this is different, right? This is something where I know what I'd be doing, and it's a sure thing. And, by then I had a small child, and, I couldn't really do anything that wasn't a sure thing. And so I thought, okay, well, I could do this. And so the audition and the resulting novel was the first thing that I had ever finished, novel length. It was the first thing I had ever finished, was the first thing that I had ever published. So that was pretty wild. And after that, it sort of broke a barrier, I think, in my mind, where, I had these thoughts about what I could and could not do. And at that point, I could not finish anything. And then I finished this thing because, you have a deadline and a contract, you have to. And that is, what I found the most beautiful thing is just, you have to do this. You have no choice. Go ahead. And I did. And then I finished the one, and I thought, wow, okay, I can finish something. I don't know if I can do it again, though. And then I did it again. And then I did it 3 more times. And I was like, okay. And then the idea was, well, I can't do something that is going to get my name on it, because then it's a whole other thing. Then it's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get into that, And then my agent brought up, within a month of each other, 2 projects, this one and the other one, from 2 different series that wanted me to, unlike the ghostwriting series, which is a very discrete world with very discrete characters, everything already sort of, set. You create the story of your own, but you're within an existing world. Unlike that, both of these series were, this series, American Horse Tales, was basically, hey, do you want to write a book about a girl and a horse? Literally whatever you want. Like, yeah, yeah, that sounds great. So, the other one was a little bit more, they wanted me to write about this particular real event that Martha Gellhorn went through in World War II on D-Day. So that was more specific. But again, like, they gave me, like, suddenly the room I was in was a lot bigger. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is scarier. I've not done something like this before. I don't have the safety boundaries that I was used to. But I was like, yeah, sure, I'll write 2 books within a year during a pandemic. So I did that, and I loved it so much. And unlike the mystery series, which I had been working on, the years before, both of these books were historical. And I was like, I don't write historical, but I mean, I will. So, and then, I mean, it was amazing because I loved it so much. I just loved all of the research. I loved the idea of making this, what I think that so many people and children feel is just this dry, like, you think of history, a lot of people, I think, oh, it's boring. It's boring. It's facts and figures and names and, like, pop quiz from high school that nobody wants to take, and I just found it, as soon as I started looking into it, it's just amazing and fascinating and so instructive about everything that's going on right now. And so translating all of that into something that would be really, interesting and adventurous for kids was an awesome challenge that I enjoyed more than anything I had done before. And so, it just opened my mind. And now that these are done, I'm really starting to challenge this idea of, like, maybe I can just do this on my own now. Like, maybe I don't need to wait for somebody to come over and be like, hey, do you want to do this? Maybe I should, and the great thing is, my next project, which I've just started working on, is going to be a combination of these two things that I've realized that I love, mystery and history. So it's just, you know, like I've really enjoyed just being sort of open to what happens, because that's what's brought me the most amazing things. It's just somebody comes and says, hey, here's this random opportunity that you've never done before. Do you want to try it? I'm like, yeah, okay. And it's been great. I mean, I think that being open to things just brings the most incredible opportunities into your life. So it's that's where I am right now.
You have a ghostwritten book on the shelf. You go to the bookstore and you take your friend and like, look, my book is on the shelf. Oh, which one? I can't say, but just know that it's here and it's amazing.
I mean, I tell people in you know, person that what I write, but I can't say it in a public forum. So it's a legacy thing. So I mean, I feel like anybody who really wanted to think about all the things I've been saying really hard probably figure it out. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's been hard. The ghostwriting has been hard because, of course, you know, everybody wants their name on the book. It's, you know, you can't talk about it, then it almost feels like, man. But because of the series and what it is, I do have a certain level of pride about doing it, because it's a historically important series to a lot of people, and it was amazing to be a part of that. So sorry to be so opaque, but
no, I've already figured out which.
Probably arrest me or something.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So both of you have this amazing idea at the same time to write about a girl and her horse, or no, it doesn't quite work that way. Samantha, how did you know each other before you both got drafted to be the rookies on the lineup here?
No, not at all. I actually messaged Michelle on Facebook, and I'm pretty sure that's how it was. I think I saw your name, and I was trying to. I always like to reach out to the people that I'm working with and talk and see if we could do some, you know, stuff together, and we just hit it off. It's just been great. But yeah, I didn't know, and the series was up in the air. Like, they didn't know how many. You know, first they were going to do 4 books in the first run, and then they were going to do just 2, and it was kind of constantly changing. But Penguin were the ones who came up with the American Horse Tales, the idea, and I had the exact same guidelines as Michelle. You know, my agent came to me and said, "Hey, there's an opportunity. Do you want to pitch for to write a book for American Horse Tales?" And you know, and I was like, "What's it about? A girl and a horse." I'm like, okay, and that's it. You can do it. That's it. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. A girl and a horse. And they did actually give some examples, like, you know, they said it could be a girl, you know, with, you know, one of the examples was actually a girl and a horse in movies. And because I had worked with video business, I'd been on the set with video, you know, a lot of movies and stuff, you know, when we were in LA. So I thought, well, maybe I can try that, because at least I know that industry, you know, pretty well. So so I pitched them the idea of Juniper and Abel, who and Juniper's dad is the horse trainer for movies, and Abel is their brand new horse, and you know, their youngest horse, and Abel is kind of Juniper's horse, and they train together, and he gets his first audition, and it's for her very, very favorite TV show, and she's just so desperate for him to get the role that she skips school, sneaks into the trailer, goes to the audition, and then accidentally gets herself hired as well, only to discover that being in a TV show is quite a bit more difficult than she had originally thought. But it was a lot of fun doing it, and then same with Michelle. You know, they liked the pitch. We started out with just a full synopsis, full outline of the whole book and the first 3 chapters. And it kind of just flew out of me, even though this is my first contemporary novel, the first one, you know, like you said about, you know, earlier on, Rob, about writing about magical stuff and then writing something with absolutely no magic. This is the first novel that I've written with absolutely no magic. And it's not something that I ever thought would come naturally to me, because I'm much more of a fantastical kind of person in my thinking. But it was a lot of fun to do that. I also have always felt a little intimidated about writing contemporary, because I didn't grow up in the US, and I grew up, you know, I mean, I was changing schools constantly when I was a kid, not only changing schools and changing towns, but changing countries. So it was, you know, it was difficult to, it's difficult for me to make sure that I have an authentic kind of school experience for middle grade. But in this version, in this book, I didn't have to worry about that, because it was a movie setting, and it was something that I had experienced and I knew, so I could write about it a lot easier. The day that I write something set in an American school, I think I'll have to get expert readers to help me with that one, for that research.
Oh, that's where all the other books are set. No, continue to go with the fantastic. When you move through so many places as a child, does that help you later with characterization? And I'm assuming that every time you moved to a new school, you had an opportunity to reinvent yourself. So maybe that helps you create a character of yourself as well. I don't know if that would be sort of an advantage that comes to your writing.
I don't know. That's a really good question. I haven't been asked that before. That's a really good question. I'm not sure. I will say I was really, really super shy as a kid, and I didn't really make friends easily, just because, you know, I kind of wanted to just be invisible and somewhere in the background. That was my superpower. You know, I could just blend in and everyone could ignore me, and then that would be the best thing. But which is funny for someone who later on wanted to be an actress. But the reason why I wanted to be an actress was because then I could become other people, and I actually gained a lot of confidence, and through a what do they call this series of books, and I'm blanking on the name, Sweethearts, not American Sweethearts. Oh, Sweet Valley High. Sweet Valley High. Yes, there was a Sweet Valley High book that I read as a kid that I loved, and it talked about, there was one of the characters, she was very shy, and so she would, to gain confidence, she would basically kind of, she liked acting, so she created a version of herself who was very confident. So when I was growing up, that's what I did, and I would literally, if anytime anything was really difficult for me, I would think about the character, the confident version of me. I would stand up straight, put my shoulders back and head high, and be like, all right, now I'm that character. And with that, stepping into that role, it was much easier to be a more confident version of myself. And so I don't know. I guess in a sense, moving around did help me learn about character, or at least different versions of myself. It did teach me one thing that I've told you know, a number of people, though, that people really deep down are all the same. We like to think that we are so different from people in other countries, and culturally, sure, there are cultural differences, but as human beings around the world, people want to feel safe, they want to feel loved, they want to feel heard. That's pretty much it. Deep down, we are all very much the same, and how we deal with those needs and wants is different. And like I said, the cultural things are different, but living in all those different countries, it did help me kind of see the similarities in people, and and the differences too, if that makes sense.
It does. Although I wonder, if you had wanted to be an actress, when you're spending time on the Hollywood sets as a reporter, and you're watching, I don't know if you were there when Christian Bale was screaming and throwing lights, or
no, I wasn't there then. I heard about it then.
If you're seeing enough of that world that kind of turns you off and you say, no, I'm not interested, or did it make you more interested?
No, it definitely made me not so interested. And I did theater in college, but even in college, I acted really much more when I was in high school. When I was in college, I acted. I even got my first professional role when I was in Tampa in a play in Tampa, and it was a lot of fun. This was because I went to college in Florida, but ultimately I found that even while I was in college, I was leaning more toward writing plays, but I didn't really know that I could, make any money whatsoever as a playwright, and I had just kind of shut off that side of my brain, like, oh, you can't make any money doing that. How does it even work? I didn't know. Funnily enough, now one of my good friends in Austin, he's a YA author and he's a playwright. So I know now that I was very stupid, and I could have done, could definitely have done that if I had, done just a little bit of research into it. But yeah, I really discovered that the writing side was much more interesting for me. And I think part of it is because when you're writing, especially when you're writing novels, you get to be the actor for every part. You get to be the director, the lighting designer, the prop master, the art director. You get to do it all. You get to create the weather if you want. And that's much more fun, I think, than just doing the acting. Maybe it's a control part of me, I don't know, but I like it a lot better to be able to do it all,
Well, the nice thing I would think about film is once you filmed a thing, it is the thing that you filmed. Everybody can see it objectively, whereas with a book, of course, only works if the reader also participates. And so you can be very clearly thinking at them that this character should obviously be cast as James Earl Jones, and they can think, nope, it's going to be Morgan Freeman, and I'm the reading, and that's how it's going to be. And also,
that's right.
You're not the lighting director, I am, and it's way brighter with lens flares everywhere than you would have thought, and that's just how it's going to be.
That's right, exactly. Exactly. When I speak to book clubs, I always say that to them. I'm like, books are only as good as your imagination. Once it's published, it's no longer my book. It's your book. You need to read it, and when you read it, it'll come alive in your mind. But I can only put the words on paper. You have to make it come alive. And I think that's really true. And it's true that people will see it in very different ways.
I wish there was a way to orchestrate a soundtrack to go with the book, so you would know when the reader got to a certain part, and then you could play whatever music you wanted them to hear. Maybe a future innovation.
Yes.
Michelle, I want to hear how you approach the same project. So if I've got this right, it's at 20,000 words, any time in history, anything you want to do, but it's girl and her horse. Can you come back and say, okay, well, I want to do an alternate history of the Donner Party, and just when they're getting ready to eat each other, this girl shows up with her horse and says, nope, my horse is willing to sacrifice itself. It's going to be okay. Or are there some limitations? I'm available. Should anyone be listening? I'm happy to write this story for your American.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like an awesome but very, very different series. You could pitch,
Zombie American Horse Tales.
American Horse Horror Tales, maybe, or Horror Horse Tales. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the limitations weren't so much more than what you've said, other than, they didn't really want posh, horse dressage stories. They wanted it to be a little bit more down to earth. They particularly wanted things that were, like just different stories than I think what you would think of as a traditional girl horse story of that kind of writing. But for me, I'm not exactly sure why I ended up thinking about the Dust Bowl. For some reason, I think I was just walking around my house. I wanted it to be historical. I knew that. And my eyes landed on my old copy of The Grapes of Wrath. And it was a story that I hadn't really read since high school or college. But it really stuck with me all of that time, particularly because it was a time in history that I feel like isn't written about a lot, especially not for children. And it was just a very evocative environment. And, I just came up with this idea about a girl, Ginny, and her horse, and living as farmers in Oklahoma in the same kind of environment during the same time period as The Grapes of Wrath. And knowing that these books would be written in first person, I thought, well, it would certainly be a challenge to write this book and have some of that dialect in there, but only enough so that it would still be very, very clear to the reader. Because, you do too much dialect and then it becomes a little bit difficult for a middle grade reader to comprehend. And also, how do you write about the Great Depression and have it be fun?
So 20,000 words while you also have to do a full plot about a girl and her horse.
Yeah. I mean, it's reasonable, right? I like a challenge, I guess. But I just got sort of really into this idea once I had thought of it. And also one of our editors, I think this was partly it, that one of the editors said specifically that he was from Oklahoma. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting detail to include about yourself. I don't know anybody from Oklahoma. And so that it all sort of unfolded. And it was really, I started doing the research. I watched a lot of Ken Burns documentaries. He has an entire 6-hour documentary just about the Dust Bowl, which is unbelievable to watch. I mean, it's crazy to think that this happened in this country, within our grandparents' time. And I mean, it's unbelievable what these people went through. And so, as soon as I had started all the research and started thinking about the development of the story was when the pandemic began. And so suddenly I had made this decision before the pandemic began. And so I was working on it, and then this whole thing descended on all of us. And it was just suddenly really poignant to be learning about this other time in our country's history where it was just an unbelievable crisis. Not just the Dust Bowl, but of course the Great Depression and everything that came with it. And suddenly I'm writing this book in the midst of this unprecedented crisis, and of people just losing their jobs and being afraid and having to come together and think how are we going to deal with this? And learning about that time and how truly horrendous it was, the things that they went through, and to know what they did to not only survive it, but to revolutionize, in the case of the Dust Bowl, farming, to make that part of the country just the most fruitful, prolific place as it is today. And I mean, and people all had to work together to make that happen. And it took a long time, and it took a lot of sacrifice, and it was just inspiring. And it was something that I didn't even realize how much I needed going through that time myself, and just seeing everything unfolding around me. And so it took on another level of meaning because of what happened. And, ultimately the story is about hope. And I thought to myself as I was coming up with the plot, I was like, how am I going to make this have a happy ending? Because it's, the book takes place in a very short amount of time. It's in 1936. They don't get out of this until a couple years later, where things really start to turn around, get better for those farmers. So I was like, man, what am I going to do? I don't want to, I wanted it to be as historically accurate as I could make it. And so, maybe this is a little spoilery, but like what ultimately it became was that, at the end, it's not that everything is better. It's not that everything is fixed. It's that there's this greater understanding and appreciation of the people within her family, and just this little tidbit of hope that here's something that we can all start to do to start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It wasn't an easy fix, and I mean, none of it was, but it was just that, that idea that like, hey, we're all in this together, and, here's something that we can all do to start to get out of this. And that sometimes that little bit is all you need to keep going. It's like the guy on the side of a cliff. I don't know if you've seen that movie about the guy who free climbed that gigantic.
Yes. Oh, that was so good. Yeah.
It was unbelievable, but like I remember watching him scale this like literal just wall. And I mean, you'd see he'd crook his finger over barely this tiny crack, and that would be enough to lift himself up to the next handhold. And I mean, it's very symbolic to me of just like how much people need to go on. It's not a lot, you don't have to give people everything to fix their problems, but you just need a little bit, just a little bit, and you can keep going. And so it was a really great experience, especially for, the book that's the first book with my name on it. It was just very meaningful. So, yeah.
Does that, and this is a question for both of you, but I'll start with you, Michelle. During all conversations, sooner or later, become a little bit about the pandemic. When you're going through this pandemic, does having this book to focus on, having this history, this research to do about the Dust Bowl, does that help to put things in perspective and focus on the history that eventually comes out okay, and maybe gives you hope that you're going to come out okay, or does that take the place of, are you able to shut off the news completely, go, nope, la, 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 I can't hear you, I'm focusing strictly on my story?
No, I think the first one, I think, it has really given me a really helpful perspective on this country's history, and that we've been through a lot, and we are continuing to go through a lot. And I mean, we are always going through a lot, and people's memories, I think, are quite short. And when you start to look back in this way, and this kind of opened up, a huge avenue for me of just finding out about all history. This book takes place in 1936. My Martha Gellhorn book takes place in 1944, and so I ended up doing research on really that entire era, that whole span of. I learned about the Roosevelts because I wanted to know about how we got to that point, and so I learned a lot about the first half of the 20th century. And I mean, this is an unprecedented situation, but we've survived everything and thrived. And I just think that's how history works. I think that people are always going through something difficult, and people are always finding ways to become better and to become, not to be corny, but a more perfect union. I mean, that is the point of democracy and of community, and, that it's never going to be perfect, and there's always going to be disasters. But people are amazing. you know, that's basically what it taught me, is that people are amazing, and also that people are awful. They will always be awful as well. And that, you know, we think that people are more awful today, but I think people are always basically a little bit awful
throughout history. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's really eye-opening, and I really like, the one thing that I really look forward to of you know, school visits and more talks is just talking about history in a way that's like, you know, reflective on where we are, and just and optimistic. You know, I think there's so much. I mean, and it's not that the negativity isn't, you know, it is really, it's really hard right now. But I think it's really important for everybody's sake, for all of us to be strong and to be optimistic, and to, you know, reach out to each other in reality and not only just on Facebook. So yeah, history. Everybody should try it. I recommend it.
It was a podcast I listened to. Well, everybody listens to it. Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. If you haven't listened to it, you're missing out. He did an episode specifically about the Colosseum and the executioners outside the Colosseum, which at one point they had what was basically the equivalent of a stand-up comics open mic night, but for executioners. So if you were a prisoner, somebody was coming up and taking requests from the crowd and learning their craft live in action. And I thought, you know what, whatever really bad thing is happening today, it's not that bad. I'm not going to the arena and waiting for the open mic night executioner to take requests from the crowd. It could be worse. Now that I know that that was also an existence on this planet that was possible, this is fine. It's good.
Yeah.
You know what else is great? Drunk history.
Also,
Have you
yes.
watched that? Oh my God, it is so funny.
I haven't seen that.
It's exactly what you think. But they tell some really amazing stories too, and they're all American stories, I think. Yeah, all the different cities. They talk about stories from every different city, and it's a funny show. Very cool concept.
Samantha, what was your pandemic experience watching the world go a little nuts, while maybe a lot nuts in some cases, while working on Hollywood and focusing on your story? Were you able to keep your nose to the grindstone, or did you have days where it's just, okay, I guess I'm just scrolling the news today, and that's what's going to happen all day today?
No, it was, for me, it was when you were asking Michelle and you gave two different scenarios. Mine was the latter one. In that case, it's one case where Michelle and I had kind of differing experiences, similar but differing, because I was basically on deadline, going back-to-back deadlines for Arrow, to Hollywood, and then I also sold the Gemstone Dragons last year. So I was also working on those books at the same time. So I was going just back-to-back from one book to the next book, and then, you know, when I was finished a revision for Arrow, I'd get in notes for Hollywood, and then I'd do a revision of Hollywood, and then I'd be working on Gemstone Dragons, and then I'd get that out of the door, and then I would have revisions back for Arrow, and it was amazing and interesting and exhausting. But for me personally, I must admit, and I you know, kind of selfishly, I feel very lucky in that, I suppose, because I was able to put away a lot of stuff. I mean, there was not only the pandemic, there was the election and everything. There was a lot going on last year that was really, really hard. And I got very stressed out about all of that. But I was able to, I mean, I most of the time, I didn't have time to look at the news. I would be able to see little snippets later on in the evening and just, you know, I had to just put it all aside because I had to concentrate on deadlines, which is probably a very good thing for me because I tend to take on too much. And so I think for my sanity, I think it was very lucky that I had all of these projects that I was working on at the same time during the pandemic. And my husband, pretty early on, you know, his company, they went all home. So he's been working from home. He's upstairs in his office right now. So he was working from home the whole time too, which was, you know, a bit different too, having him in the house all the time, but that was fun too. He could bring me lunch every so often and get me off my computer and say, you need to take a lunch. And I'm like, I never take lunch. Like, you need to take lunch. So yeah, so the pandemic was a bit different. I think part of the biggest thing for me with the pandemic, other than just the reality of everything that was going on, was you know, worrying about the rest of my family, because we've got, you know, I've got family all over the world. My parents are in the Cayman Islands. I wasn't sure, and the island was completely closed down. You know, the borders were closed, so I wasn't sure how all that was going to work out. They handled, the Cayman government handled it really well, and so they're all safe. But yeah, that I think was one of the biggest stresses, you know. So it was a busy time.
Well, thankfully that's all been resolved now, and water under the bridge, and never.
All gone.
I will say that 2020 kind of maxed out my capacity for shock and anger and everything else that could possibly be there. And
seriously,
I have not cut off the news completely, but after the insurrection failed, I said, well, I worried for so long, rightfully so. It was all quite horrifying, but did all of my worrying make a difference? And I think that from an anxiety perspective, I was kind of like wearing my lucky pants and hoping that was going to help the team win. But yeah. The lucky pants are not a factor here. So reading the news every day and having, you know, a miniature heart attack is not going to impact the outcome either way. Yeah. And so it's given me a sense of perspective that hopefully is going to follow me for the rest of my life, because unfortunately I don't think the news is going to stop being so interesting, at least for a while. And as it is, I would like to be able to just read the facts and say, oh, well, that is the thing that's happened. Is that something I can impact directly? And if the answer is no, well, let me set that aside and focus on the things that I can. Now, that is a very lofty ideal, and I hope that I'm able to continue to live up to it. But if not, you do it, esteemed audience, and that way at least someone will be doing it. And Samantha, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you about being the regional advisor for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators there in Austin. What is that role like, and what does that bring to your writing and publishing career?
That was another thing, actually, I forgot to mention. That was another thing that I was dealing with during the pandemic, because, of course, we had to switch everything to online. And so, as well as the deadlines, I was also dealing with that, and we have monthly meetings that we meet at the Book People, our biggest local independent bookstore. We have speakers come, and I remember when everything kind of hit Austin, and I think this was in March, we had Chris Barton was our speaker for that meeting. And I emailed him like a few days before, and we were just starting to get a lot of cases in Austin. And I said, I'm starting to think maybe we need to go on, you know, online. What do you think? So we had to make this kind of split decision days before the event that we were moving it online just to protect everyone. So we did that. But then we had a conference on May 1st. Of that year. So 2 months later, so I had, as well as all these deadlines, I had to move an entire conference, you know, well, me and my team had to move an entire conference online for, you know, close to 200 attendees and 20 something faculty members, which was interesting, but it all worked out. It was a beautifully amazing weekend. just sitting at a computer, but it was the most that I'd seen anyone for a really long time, and it was a lot of fun to do. But to answer your question, this was something that I never really thought I would be able to do, because again, I had a great deal of lack of self-esteem and kind of belief in myself and insecurities. And a friend of mine, an author, Bethany Hegedus, had kind of encouraged me and said, "You'd be really good at this." And so then I got the opportunity to do it, and I'm so glad that I did. I've now been the regional advisor of this Austin chapter this is my 8th year, I think. And it's been an amazing experience. The people that I've met through it have been fantastic. I was able to build up a much bigger community through this, not just within Austin, but also all over the world, because I've been in connection with RAs and other volunteers, illustrator coordinators, assistant regional advisors for, at chapters all over America, but also all over the world. And we have a listserv, so we keep in touch. The listserv is really for business, for SWRI business, but knowing that we get advice from each other, and then I would see them at conferences. So I gained all of these additional friends. And prior to being the RA, I was not published, and but I didn't even have an agent. And I remember my first conference that I put on, all of these, a bunch of people were, making really good contacts with agents and with editors as well. Some of my published friends were making really good contacts with editors, things that could potentially happen. And I was thinking, none of these people are really going to be right for my books. And so I was thinking, well, I'm not going to make as good contacts in this, but that's okay. I'm helping them. I'm learning a lot. I'm meeting people. It'll be great. And then it actually turned out that a friend of mine, another author, Donna Janelle Bowman, was talking to an agent at the conference, and my friend Donna basically kind of pitched my book, The Boy, the Boat, and the Beast, to this agent. And the agent then asked me and said, "Everyone else is pitching me their book except for you, but I hear it's really great. Why aren't you pitching it?" And in my head, I was thinking, well, knowing kind of the books that she represents, I didn't think that she would really be interested in my kind of writing. She had amazing clients, but they were very different. So I thought, I'd be wasting my time sending it to her. And I didn't tell her that at the time. I was just like, oh, I'd love to send you my stuff. So she said, "Send it, I'd love to read it." Sure enough, 3 months later, she sent me a rejection letter. And I was like, well, there you go. By this time, I'd already had, hundreds of rejections. Well, not hundreds. I had like over 100 by the time I signed with my agent. So I'd had like plenty of rejections by then, probably over 100. But the interesting thing was, she said, "These are ready to go. They're just not right for me. But you should send them to these 2 other people." And I promptly did not follow her advice, because I was busy writing another book that I was planning to self-publish, and a YA book. And so then a few months went by, and then I got an email where she was copying me on a conversation that she'd been having with these 2 other agents about me, which was amazing. And they both wanted to read my books, so I sent it to them. And one of them, Rachel Orr with Prospect, was the agent who signed me. And so, I got my agent through Liza Pulitzer Voges, who had recommended me, and she met me, through a conference that I had put on, and hired, asked her to come and be, part of this conference. So, would she have done that if I wasn't the RA? Maybe. I don't know. But I do know that thanks to SCBWI, I've learned so much through the courses and everything that they put on, through the courses that I've organized and been able to sit in on. And I don't have a master's degree, in creative writing. So I basically kind of learned through SCBWI workshops. And yeah, all of those connections that I've made has been amazing. And Laurent Lynn, funnily enough, was the art director at the exact same conference. And we had kind of kept in touch after that conference. And because I had taken him, he didn't have a flight out, so I'd taken him on a little driving tour around Austin. So when my book sold to Simon & Schuster, and he's the art director for Simon & Schuster, I really wanted to, say to my editor, can I just tell my one friend at Simon & Schuster? But then he heard about it. I had told him about the book. We'd had coffee, and I told him that I was working on the book, way back when. And then he heard about it and asked to work on it. So he was then my art director at Simon & Schuster. The industry is a very small industry, really. Everyone knows everyone. People meet and keep in touch, and you make all these connections. And SCBWI has been an amazing place for that. And being a volunteer there, I always recommend to people, if you can volunteer, do it. If you have the time, try to do it, even if it's just a small job, because you'll make so many more connections. And I'm not just talking about business connections. As the RA, I was able to make those, and even as a volunteer, you can. But I'm also talking about just your community. As a person who is pretty shy usually, it helped me to be able to go to somewhere. I was volunteering for SCBWI long before I became the RA, because I could go to an event and I could say, oh yeah, I run one of the critique groups. And that helped me to have something to talk about other than, feeling bad and getting that "are you published" question, which I've always hated. People never ask somebody else, "are you published?" Ask them what they're working on. It's much more fun. And, so yeah, I highly recommend it. I think it's an amazing organization, and everybody, the support and encouragement that you get from the people within it, the volunteers, is amazing. It's been fun.
Whatever it's worth, I think that 8 years as a regional advisor to the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators is at least the equivalent of a master's degree. And I'm watching our time, and it's flown by. Where did it go? And yet, esteemed audience, knows I must ask. So, Michelle, I'm going to start with you. Have you ever seen a ghost and/or a flying saucer?
Let's see.
I should be clear when I ask a question like this. If you've seen Bigfoot, don't hold out on me. Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, all of it.
Okay. Well, seen, no. Spoken to, I believe, yes. When I was a kid, I had one of my best friends lived in a house, literally a house on a hill in our neighborhood, which was a mostly newish neighborhood, except for her house, which was a holdover, I suppose, because it's like over probably now close to 200 years old or something like that. The house had a name, Rose Hill. And I spent a huge amount of my childhood on Rose Hill. And when we were kids and had sleepovers together, as all young girls do, we would pull out the Ouija board and attempt to contact the spirits living in the house, and had, I think, marginal success. I think that we did speak to a spirit who lived in the house at some point in its long history. Her cellar was like a Civil War era cellar, and then they built the house on top. So we would go into the scary cellar with the Ouija board and speak to the, I can't remember the name of the ghost at this point, so I apologize, but So yes, my answer is yes.
She's gonna, the ghost's gonna haunt you now and be like, don't you forget my name.
I know. Maybe I just blocked it out. I'm not sure.
Do you remember at what point that it became clear to you that, oh no, this isn't just a spooky game I'm playing with my friends. We're actually talking to somebody here?
I still do not know the answer to that question. I think, even today I am really fascinated by all of that sort of occult, supernatural stuff. I find it really interesting because it's hard to disprove it. You can't prove it really, but you can't disprove it either. So yeah, ghosts, great stuff.
Samantha, the same question.
I'm the similar answer actually. I think I didn't see a ghost, but I think I was in the presence of a ghost one time. Before, when I was, it must have been about 9 actually. It was before my parents and I moved to Jamaica. My parents were looking, we were living in England, and my parents were looking at buying a very, very old farmhouse on this farmland, and it had been abandoned for years, and they were looking at buying it and kind of doing it up. And so I went with them one day to look at this farmhouse, and they're looking around at, the structure and stuff, and they said, go, and I'm an only child, so it was just, me, the only child. And they're like, go look around, go see what do you think of the bedrooms and stuff. So I go upstairs, and I'm not the bravest person in the world. So I'm like crawling upstairs going, okay, this is super creepy. But there was nothing really there. The house was empty. Nobody had lived there in probably 100 years. I mean, it was a very, very old farmhouse in English countryside. And I go into this one room, and I remember this so vividly because I opened the door, and the only room, I pushed the door open, and it was the only room that had any furniture in it, and all it had was a rocking chair, and it was rocking.
Oh no,
I know, that's what I thought. I ran all the way down and said, I don't like it here, and I ran out to the car. that was as far as I could.
Nope. That's a big nope for me.
Seriously? I know. So I think that I was in the presence of a ghost. Yeah, but I was too chicken to run over to actually stay long enough to see. I was just hightailed it out of there really fast. But I'm pretty sure there were no open windows. I mean, old houses can be drafty, but to push a rocking chair, and it was the only piece of furniture in the entire house. I think it was a ghost. I'm convinced.
Yeah, no, the wind powerful enough to move a rocking chair, you're going to notice and feel that.
Right. That's what I think, and I couldn't feel anything.
That's a situation in which a superpower of invisibility is not going to help out so much because the ghost is also invisible. Presumably, they're still going to be able to see you. So
that's right. Maybe if you have the power of invisibility, though, maybe you can get into their realm.
Yeah.
The idea of invisibility could go lots of ways. I was actually thinking about this a lot when I was writing Opal's story, because that's her power. But I didn't get into the ghost realm. But I was thinking well, is invisibility just you're invisible, but you're still there? You're still physical? Or is invisibility that you're not even physical anymore? You can put your hand through things. And which is what Opal ends up being able to do. But in this case, like you just said, Rob, maybe invisibility can send you to the ghost realm. Then you can actually see ghosts and hear ghosts, and that would be a whole other idea. That could be a good book.
Your next book.
I know.
I was reading my name in the acknowledgments. This is going to be fantastic.
Absolutely. I'm liking this idea.
It's fantastic. I so appreciate both of you making the time. Wonderful episode. I think esteemed audience has enjoyed themselves, hopefully as much as we have. My final question for you is always some variation of it. Michelle, I'll start with you. If you could go back toward the start of your career, and give yourself, or whenever in your career it would have been useful to give yourself some advice that would have made a difference and might make a difference for everyone that's watching or listening to us now, what would you go back and tell yourself?
I would say be bold. Simple answer.
And remind esteemed audience, where can they go to find you online again?
MichelleJCorpora.com.
And Samantha, what would you go back and what advice would you give yourself?
I think I would tell myself to believe, stop worrying, but also, and I tell this to kids a lot, to not judge your work by a published book. Because, you know, when my books have sold, there have been many, many more revisions that have come after the book has sold. And it still took me a long time before I got to the point where I was writing work that would sell. It took me a long time and many books before I was writing work that would sell to editors. It was, you know, a high enough quality, but the even after it sold, there were still so many more revisions, and then you've got editors helping me, and then I've got copy editors and proofreaders who are helping to make it, you know, the best book. I remember when I was starting out, I would write something and then I would think that I'd be like, okay, I think this is doing pretty, I'm getting somewhere here. And then I'd go and read a published book and I would just, it would be so good. And I'd think I can never do that. But the point is that you can, and you can't judge your first draft or your second draft or even your third draft by that published book. Exactly.
Esteemed audience, as always, for interviews with publishing professionals, authors, the entire back catalog of the show, everything that's good in this world, go to middlegradeninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Beings. It will change your life. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.
Thanks so much, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.